Before we begin, I do have a question, and that is, my wife would tell you that once I get started talking, I sometimes don't get stopped. So what time is class? What time is supposed to be over?
But it's the same way with all the people downstairs. It's the same way with all the people downstairs. Once you get started talking,
and they don't stop talking.
It's like
Okay.
30 cats.
All right.
But
people are coming.
some of the parents might have to leave early, but we could go to like half an hour.
Sure. Okay. All right. Sounds good. Sounds good. Well, what I'm going to talk about, and actually,
Oh, there it is. Oh, there it is.
I should have grabbed on the back bench back here. I'm going to ask Kent to pass these out. This is sort of an outline of what we'll talk about this morning. It's got my contact information on it, but that's just because I use it in a number of states, so you can contact Kent on any of these things as well. So first of all, thanks again for the opportunity to be here this morning. It's always good being in a place where I recognize as many so it's good to be here. As we were driving here, Bonnie, who was with me, she made the comment, she said, I think the last time that I was at East Union was when I played piano for Dave and Lisa Yoder's wedding. So that tells you it's been a little while since she's been here, but I've enjoyed being here the last number of times. What I want to do this morning is to talk about a number of tools or strategies related to generosity. You know, in this sermon, I talk about sort of why we're generous. The reality is that very, very few of us are generous primarily because of tax advantages, right? We're generous because we care about East Union, we care about MDS, we care about Crooked Creek, whatever, right? But the reality is that for many of us, there is often a more strategic way that allows us to extend our generosity beyond in ways beyond what we can do when we're just giving cash. Or another way, one of my colleagues says, friends don't let friends give cash. And his point is to say that for many people, there's a more tax efficient way to give. And so that's what we're going to talk about this morning, or what I'm going to walk through is a number of things related to that. So it's going to be very tools oriented rather than the theological aspects of generosity, but I'm glad to talk about that as well. Okay? So let's just go ahead and hop in. And just to give this a little bit of a context, when Kent's talking with people about their financial life, there's sort of these 6 areas of financial planning that are typically part of a person's financial life. And you'll see them there: cash flow planning or budgetings, the money coming into and out of our lives, the protection planning or insurances that are part of our lives, investment planning or retirement planning, very related to each other, but not exactly the same. Many of these things have tax implications to them. And then estate planning, which we sometimes describe as our final act of stewardship. Those are sort of the 6 normal things that most financial planners will talk about. At Everence, we have the gift of being able to talk about a 7th piece as well, because we very much see that charitable planning is a part of our financial journey. So that's, again, the things that we'll be talking about this morning. And when we talk about some of these tools, I often will frame them in sort of 3 different categories. There's a set of gift strategies that help now in terms of taxation kinds of things. There are a set of gifting things that can help later. And then there are also ways that you can actually be generous and provide a stream of income. So say you're at a point where you're not really in a position where you can give away something because you need income from it, but you want to be able to support charity. And so there are some ways to do those kinds of things. So that's what we're going to walk through. And then just really quickly, this is pretty similar to what's on the list there, but these are the kinds of things that are there, and we'll talk about them in this order. So the first thing, when it comes to current generosity, for many people, a particularly advantageous tool is called a donor advised fund. And I will often describe a donor advised fund as sort of being like a charitable checking account, okay? So you can gift resources of some kind. They can be cash, they can be appreciated securities. I'll describe some of those on the next slide. And you put them into this bucket, if you will, that's called a donor advised fund. And then from that bucket, you can make distributions to whatever charity that you want to be able to support. And I'll show an example of of one way that can be particularly advantageous wise. One of the great things about a donor advised fund is that you can put virtually anything into it. By far the most common things that people put into donor advised funds are cash, securities, mutual funds, stock, share, bonds, etc. Real estate, often when people are wanting to gift a piece of real estate or a portion of a piece of real estate, that can be a helpful way. And farm commodities. Frankly, farmers have available to them the single best giving strategy that's available to anybody, and that is gifting farm commodities. I'm going to talk about a specific example of that in a bit. But on the right-hand side, you can see a number of other things that the Everence Foundation has received over the years. Puppies and emus, maple syrup, honey, those kinds of things. The last one there, toy collection, I just added this one to the slide. About a week and a half ago, we actually wrapped up an online auction. There were a set of four siblings that had received a toy collection from their grandfather that had 500 or so cast iron and older toys that if they were to sell them, they were going to have a very significant capital gains obligation. And so they ended up gifting them to the foundation, and we sold them on their behalf. And so that was a fun piece to be able to be a part of. And then the one that I've gotten the most enjoyment talking about recently is manure. We actually had a farmer who gifted us 300,000 gallons of hog manure. And we said, well, we don't want to put in a lagoon. And so then we say, so please sell that on our behalf. So he sells it to the neighboring farmer, and then the farmer writes out a check to the Everence Foundation, and then he's able to make distributions from that. And that's very, very similar to what happens with the farm commodities that I was talking about. Because in doing that, he then no longer needs to count income from that as farm income for him, right? And so it saves him federal tax, state tax, and self-employment tax. And it's that self-employment tax that, like I said, gives farmers the particular advantage. By far, the most common thing that we get in that regard is corn and soybeans. That's our first manure gift. But many of these other things sort of had the same general format to them. Right? So that's one of the great things about a donor advised fund is that you can gift virtually anything that we can put a value on and that we can easily sell. That easily sell part was where it was part of the conversation when it came to the manure, for sure. As I said, commodity giving is the way to do that. And because what happens is you don't need to report that corn sale, I'll use that as the example, as income, but you still get to deduct all the production costs that go against it. And so it brings your taxes down in a number of ways. And so just in terms of math, farmers can often gift up to $1,400 or more, depending on your brackets, in commodities at the same net cost to them as giving $1,000 in cash. So I like to sort of frame it in that way. Another way that this donor advised fund has really helpful for people is with a strategy that's called bunching deductions. Many of you will remember that a few years ago, they greatly increased the standard deduction. So many people who were itemizing their deductions before are no longer able to. Well, this donor advised fund provides a way to work around that because you get your deduction when you put something into the donor advised fund. So this is going to be the most technical slide that I've got here. It just sort of shows on the left hand somebody who, you know, has taxes and interest income and charitable gifts in a normal year. And those blue lines represent where the standard deduction is. And so they're never able to itemize their deductions. So what they could do instead is to, with a donor advised fund, put the money into the donor advised fund in 2022 and then have that money there available for future years. And so as a result of that, it means that in this example, the person would have been able to deduct an additional $11,000 over the course of a couple of years. So that's just, like I said, that's the most technical slide that will be here, but it just sort of gives you can kind of picture kind of what happens there, one way that these donor advised funds can be really, really helpful. The other sort of current one that I always want to is something called IRA qualified charitable distributions. If you have a traditional IRA, what happened was you put money into that account pre-tax, so you didn't pay any taxes on it. But then when you take the money out in retirement, you have to pay taxes on it because you've never paid taxes on it yet. Well, there is a way around that, and that is that you can actually gift that money directly from this IRA to the charities that you want to support. And so it has the great advantage, and essentially then and when you gift it directly to the organization, you're not receiving it, and so you're not paying taxes on it, right? So you have the advantage of being able to gift into it, or to save into it tax-free. It grows tax-free, and then you can gift out of it tax-free. And then there's a number of bullets there. It has to go directly to the charity, although you'll see I have an asterisk there that I'll come back to. You can actually gift up to $100,000 per year in this way. And then, as I said, it's not reported as income. And so as a result, you never received it, so you don't get a tax receipt. The can serve as RMD, required minimum distribution. In the past, when you reached the age of 70 and a half, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit later as well, the government basically has said, we didn't get our taxes when you put the money back in, we want our taxes. And so at age 70 and a half, they say you have to start taking it out so that they can get their tax money. That age has been pushed back, and I'll talk about that in a few slides. And so this can serve as a way of meeting that required distribution when you reach that age. Another question that often comes up for people is, can I do this kind of thing with a 401k or a 403b? Because that sounds very similar. I put money in and I didn't pay taxes, and then at some point I'm going to have to take them out or whatever. The answer I say is no and yes. No, in that you can't do it directly from your 401k or your 403b, but you can typically roll that 401k or 403b over into an IRA and then do it from the IRA. Okay, and that's something that Kent would be able to walk you through very, very, very easily. The last bullet there, to a donor advised fund. So I was talking about this donor advised fund, how great they are and how you can gift almost anything into them. And so the natural question is, can I gift my qualified charitable distribution into a donor advised fund so that I can give it later? The answer in the past has been no. We are actually in the process of setting up a new kind of fund that will allow you to do that with some limitations, right? And so that is something we'll be able to talk to either or I in the relatively near future, maybe not for another month, basically what it amounts to is you'd be gifting it into a designated fund where you'll be identifying what's the charity that's going to receive this down the road, okay? So you won't have the ability to gift it to different organizations, but there will be that possibility, okay? I have a tendency to jump into the weeds pretty quickly. Questions or on any of these things that I've named so far? And Joel does have a mic. Okay, well, we'll keep hopping along. So the next thing that I want to talk a little bit about is making gifts at the end of life. So when we're doing our estate planning, there's a number of questions that I think are really, really helpful for us to think about as faithful followers. One of them is, what do I mean, because really it comes back down to thinking about what is my legacy. But my legacy can actually be in many different ways. We tend to think about this in terms of our financial legacy, but there's also our faith legacy. There's the legacy of the values that we pass on to other people. So estate planning, we always, when we do presentations about that, we emphasize that an estate plan is about way more than just what's going to happen to my assets, okay? But there are some significant questions to ask along the way. One of the questions is, what's the right amount to give to my heirs? Most often our kids, but to our heirs. I'm guessing that no one here today is as wealthy as Warren Buffett. If you're familiar with that name. But he supposedly said, I want to give enough to my kids so that they can do anything that they want to, but not so much that they can do nothing. And his point was to say that depending on where our circumstances are, there may be an amount that if we gift it to our kids isn't necessarily in their biggest benefit, and the charities that we care about there may be ways that we can support those along the way. Another question that I think is significant to ask is when is it too soon or too late to give an inheritance to our kids? When at an earlier point when Bonnie and I were doing our estate planning, then the concern was our kids are pretty young, right? When our kids were in junior high, if we would have passed away and they would have received a large sum of money, they may or may not have been positioned to make good decisions with that, right? So that probably was too early to gift it to them directly. So we had ways to work around that. Another question, though, that frankly comes up more often, I think, for people is, is there a time when it's frankly plenty late to be giving our kids inheritance? It is not at all unusual that we will have folks come to us to talk about what to do with an inheritance that they received, and they're already receiving Social Security, The reality is, with longer lifespans, when people are living into their 80s and 90s, it's not at all unusual for people to be receiving an inheritance at age 50 or age 60 or even at age 70, kind of thing, right? And so might there be ways to think about passing along assets to our children at an earlier point in life, maybe at the point that they're, wanting to, when they've got student loan debt that you could help them, cover, or help them have down payment for a house, etc. So those are legitimate questions to ask. And then along the way, as I referenced, there's these different types of legacies, so thinking about what is important to me, what communicates my values. And one reality is that for many of us, a gift through our estate in some way may be the largest gift that we'll give. Many of us may not be in a position where we can write a check for, $100,000, $200,000, $500,000, but it's not at all unusual that some of us might be in position where there could be an estate gift that is, very significant beyond what we've been able to write, on a year-to-year basis. And so thinking about what are the ministries, what are the organizations that would benefit from the resources that have accumulated over a period of time. Another question then that often comes up is sort of what's the right amount if I do want to include charity? What's the right amount to give to charity? And we have people think about these in all kinds of different ways. A common way that people often think about, especially with a first estate plan that includes charity, might be to say, I want to tithe a portion of my estate. So I've been tithing with my, giving over the course for my income over the course of my lifetime. What if I tithed with my estate at the end, right? Another common way that we will frequently have, and there can be any other percentage that you can use. You can use 20%, you can use, 30, whatever. Another way that really is a variation on that percentage is we've had a significant number of people who will adopt charity as their additional child, okay? So, for example, Bonnie and I have 2 sons. So we could set up our estate so that Tony receives a third, Ryan receives a third, and charity receives a third. And then from that charity, we can have that go to 2 different organizations, right? And so that's a very common strategy that we have seen a lot of people use over the years. When we've typically thought about gifting to charity in our estate or in our death, we've most often thought about it in terms of putting charity in our will document. And that's an okay thing to do. The reality is that people are doing, that is much less of the way that people are transferring used to be. Now, probably the most common way, or a very common way, I should say, is people identifying charity as the beneficiary of their of accounts of different kinds, especially retirement accounts. And you'll see in I think the next slide why that can be particularly helpful. But it's a very simple thing to do. You just go to whoever has that account. You go to Kent or whoever and fill out an updated beneficiary form that just says I want if I. Like in my case, I could say my beneficiary is going to be Bonnie, but if Bonnie passes away, my beneficiary is going to be the Everence Foundation, okay? And then when I pass away, you send in the death certificate and the money gets sent on, and it avoids going through the probate process and all these kinds of things. So it's a very simplified way to give. And here's a very simple example as to how as why this might make sense. So this is imagine a couple, the Snyders, they have $250,000 in their IRA, they have a bank balance of $250,000 or a house or whatever, right? And their idea was to say, well, we're going to have that in the estate, and then we want half of it to go to charity and half of it to go to our daughter. Okay? So they're thinking, okay, each is going to receive $250,000. Well, the problem with that is that part about the IRA never having been taxed before is the reality is that if they pass on their IRA, there's a chunk of that money is still going to be taxable to the estate. So if you were in the 24% bracket, for example, the reality is they're out of that $500,000, $60,000 goes to the IRS and only $220,000 go to the charity and to the daughter. Most people that we work with would rather have that number in the middle be zero, the IRS taxes piece, okay? And so the way around that would be to name the charity as the beneficiary of the IRA. It goes directly there, and then these other things, the bank balance or house or whatever, those will typically go on to the heir directly as well, and in that case, there's no taxation. So for many people, if they're wanting to identify charity as a part of their estate planning, the very easy way to start is just by naming charity as the beneficiary of your retirement accounts. I was using IRA, but the same thing would apply to a traditional 403B or 401k account as well. Those would be taxed if they go to your kids, and there may be certain limitations as far as them having to withdraw that money within a certain period of time, whether or not they need it at that time, right? So, and again, that's a place where Kent would be able to walk you through the nuts and bolts of how those different things play together. Let me, before I go on to that slide, questions on this piece. Okay, let's hop on to a couple of other gifts. These are the ones that I was saying earlier. Sometimes people might have an asset or something and they'd say, wow, I would really like to make a gift, but I still need some income for retirement, right? Well, there's a couple tools that can be really helpful in this regard, and I'm going to walk through them fairly quickly, but I think you'll get a grasp of the concept. So the first one is called a charitable gift annuity. And on this one, you would make a gift of cash or stocks or bonds or other kinds of securities into a gift annuity. You would enter a gift annuity contract with, and again, I'm using Everence as our example all the way through, just because that's what I'm most familiar with, right? And then with that gift annuity would pay you a stream of income, or you and your spouse, or you and one other person, it can go to two people, until you pass away, however long that is. And then at the point that you pass away, whatever is left in that annuity goes on to the charities that support, okay? And here's an example, the other one is very similar in many ways, has a few different wrinkles to it. And that one's called a charitable unit trust. This one of the most significant differences is that a person can gift land into it. Just in the last 2 years or so, Kent and I have worked on 3 or 4 different ones of these where somebody made a gift of land to the Everence Foundation. We worked with them to sell that land and then put the proceeds of that into a charitable trust or the charitable trust sold the land, and then that charitable trust will pay an income stream to the person for as long as they live. And again, there's lots of flexibility on this one in particular, but it can be a really great way to do it. But it's used very often with farmland. But it also can be used really with any kind of asset, cash, appreciated assets as well. Here's a quick example of what this might look like, the charitable gift annuity. We would be able to run illustrations on this because some of these numbers will depend on your age, but we can run these same kinds of illustrations for others. So for example, say someone has $10,000 in cash that they want to put into a gift annuity. They would do that because there's money that's going to go to charity when I pass away. There is a charitable deduction up front. It won't be the entire $10,000 because we don't know how much is going to go to charity and we don't know when it's going to go. So there will be an actuarial calculation where that will generate that. So in this particular case, for John and Jane, who are age 76 and age 73, their tax deduction was about $3,700. Based on their ages, this is going to pay 5% for the rest of their lives until the second person passes away. These can be really, really attractive when you get even into your 80s and later 80s, because that interest rate can get high as 8 or 9% when you get into that age bracket. Okay, and a lot of people like it because it is guaranteed. And so it will happen for the rest of your life. And then in that case as well, because part of that money that's coming to you is a return of the money that you put in the first place, there are actually some taxation advantages in the income that you receive along the way. And then, as I said, when a person passes away, whatever's left in that annuity will go to the charities that they want to support. When we run these illustrations, we always just say 50% because it's going to depend on how long you live and how the underlying investments did. Our experience has been that on average, it's been a little bit more than 50%, but that gives you a reference point there. But like I said, we could work with you. If this is something that's like, that sounds like it might be of interest, you could talk to either Kent or I, and we could run one of these illustrations that's specific to you. The charitable trust one, I'm not going to run through an illustration, but it looks very similar in ways. But you do have, like I said, some other flexibility that comes along with that one. The other piece that I maybe should have named this at the very beginning, this form is one of the most enjoyable forms that we ever get to work with, and I would say that one of the most enjoyable forms, one of the most enjoyable financial forms that you will ever fill out, and that is, or that you can ever fill out. And that is, this is the recommendation form that we would have on file if you made a gift to the Everence Foundation. And then when you pass away, we would distribute that money according to the instructions that are set on this form, right? So there's a form in a file in Goshen that has the one from Bonnie and me that lists the several, charities that we want to support. And the great thing about this one is it's so easy to update. So you don't have to go, when I talked earlier about the, many people give to charity through their will. If you wanted to, if you identified the charities in your will and you wanted to change those, you would have to go back to the attorney and update the will. In this case, what's simpler for many people is just to say, I want this component to go to the Everence Foundation, and then you can just update this form with us as you wish, right? So that is, like I said, that's being able to, when a person passes away, and we pull that form out, and it's a way of people have communicated what has been important to them, right? Commonly, people will put 3 or 4 or 5 charities on them. The reality is you can put as many as you want to. One of my colleagues in Kansas said the record that he has come across was somebody who identified 23 charities that they wanted to support over the course of their lifetime, right? So the reality is it's very flexible, and that can be done to either go immediately or over a period of time or et cetera. All of these things that I talked about, really with any of them, there's a fair amount of latitude. There will be certain things that we can't do or have to do, but beyond that, there will be an awful lot of latitude in your ability to support the organizations that you care about. Okay, so questions on that piece as well. Yes. Yes, actually, what I was thinking I would do is, if I could pass along, I'll send along a PDF of the PowerPoint to Joel, and then you can either put it on the website or send it out electronically or whatever.
Okay. Sure.
Yeah.
We can do that.
Yeah. Thank you. I wanted to mention that because I was definitely racing through these things quickly. Last year, during the year 2022, folks like you gifted about $120 million to the Everence Foundation over the course of the year, and we had the opportunity to be able to distribute about $80 million to organizations like East Union, MDS, Crooked Creek, Crowded Closet, et cetera. And so that really is a fun part of the job that we get to do with people. Since the foundation started in the 50s, it's about $1.6 billion has gone to organizations, and that's just fun to imagine. The amount of effect that's had on churches and organizations along the way.
About donating to Red Cross or whatever.
Yeah.
And you want to know which of these organizations do the most for the dollars that you give them.
Yeah.
Where do you, what website do you?
Yeah. There are a number of sites that are available. Do you remember any of them specifically? There are some sites, especially for the national organizations, that will have stats on how much of their money is used for, administrative costs or et cetera. But I don't remember the name. I don't remember any of the websites directly on that. Okay, what I can say is our experience in interacting with many of the organizations that we work with, especially in the Anabaptist Mennonite circles, is that they would score very well on those things. I think we're blessed with interactions with organizations that use their money very, very wisely. Yeah, great question. Where I thought you might be going with that question is sort of what happens if I want to support an organization that that maybe nobody else has supported through Everence before, right? The reality is you can support virtually any nonprofit, any 501c3 organization, as long as they've gotten to the point of having that legitimate 501c3 designation from the IRS. You can typically do that. If it's an organization that's not already on our list, and I was we worked with a couple in South Dakota that sent a list of like 15 organizations that they wanted to send a check to, and they said, well, this one and this one and this one probably aren't in your system or whatever. Well, it turns out all of them but one were. But all we needed to do then was just verify that they are indeed a 501c3 company, nonprofit organization or whatever, and that their values don't conflict with Everence's values. But we try to take a pretty gracious approach to that. So I think I've heard that in a given year we may nix only half a dozen or something like that. Yeah.
Two websites are Charity Watch, Charity Navigator for both orgs.
Okay, thanks. Charity Watch and charitynavigator.org. Yeah. Greg, did you have your hand up as well? Okay, sorry.
Well, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Really appreciate Lyle for your sermon and for sharing this morning. And then Kenteth is in Kelowna, so you have Lyle's information on the sheet there, but you can contact the Everence office in Kelowna too if you haven't already done so. And I use them, so.
Thank you. We and as we say, Everence is creative in a lot of ways, but not in assigning email addresses. So all you need to remember is lyle.miller or kent.blossom@everence.com is an easy way to get in touch with us. So thanks for your participation, and glad to hang around. I don't need to be into the office until 8 tomorrow morning, so I'm glad to talk as long as anybody wants to. Bonnie may disagree, may have a different answer on that, but anyway, thanks. All right, thank you.